So, if you will, imagine you are in the beautiful Northern Sierra, as is pictured here, and walking along a trail. You can see lots of trees. The air is very clean and cold, and because the air is so clean, we see these bright yellow, kind of neon yellow lichens hanging out on the trees. And usually when you see these bright yellow lichens, they kind of live on the arms of the tree, like on the tops of the boughs. I guess they don't have arms. In this case, they have this kind of weird pattern. So they kind of grow in rings. And I found this very mysterious. Do you know why they grow in these ring patterns? Any theories? No? The sun? How would that work? Okay, so maybe something to do with light. I was kind of thinking like snow, like maybe the snow reaches some particular level and they grow with that. I don't think the snow gets that high, but that seemed reasonable at the time. Yeah. Interesting that it's sort of like a sun pattern, but they only reach it through. Yeah. Mm-hmm. That would be a good void-based solution. I like that. That there's it's so any other theories? Shano. Yeah, maybe something. Yeah, something about the growing season, where there's nutrient or light availability. Uh-huh. The branches are mostly up higher. I don't know why they mostly don't have branches lower. It's even worse in Canada. I don't know why. If you go to Canada, the trees are like naked almost all the way up. It's weird. Yes. Yeah, I found this incredibly mysterious. You have. I like that. The bark actually grows higher. Metabolism, yeah. All of these. So I was hiking when I took this. I was hiking with David Chapman. No big deal. I know David Chapman. But we couldn't figure this out. So I of course had to search this on the internet. What's going on with this? I'll give you the solution. You ready for the answer? Here's the answer. So we have to say, not just how did the lichens get there, the lichens, weirdly, grow in little voids, little holes. So it's easier for the lichen to infect the tree if it's been pecked into by somebody. And this is the somebody. He's a yellow-bellied sapsucker, which is a kind of woodpecker. Most of the woodpeckers we have are a little guy called a red-breasted woodpecker, but you can see both him and the little rows he makes. So they peck around in little rows. They don't do it just anywhere. They kind of go in rows. In different kinds of trees, they make different patterns, but in these pine trees, they make this kind of pattern. So we have to say not just, how did the lichens get there, but how did the voids get there so that the lichens could get in? And we'll see, this is sort of an introductory example for void thinking. Okay. And a lot of things work in this way. This is the void chapter of the Tao Te Ching, the chapter 11, I believe. And Lao Tzu wants to give us kind of everyday examples of how voids work. The wheel, if you make a cart wheel or a wagon wheel, why does it need a void in the middle? I don't think most of us think in terms of this because it's such a weird technology. Like our wheels, we don't see very much, but they need a void in the middle because there's an axle. Yeah, the axle has to go through there. Otherwise, it's just a wheel rolling by itself. So a pole has to go through the wheel. So that's the kind of wheel he's talking about. You see this pattern everywhere. Things like he talks about clay vessels, like a water-carrying vessel or something, but coffee cups, bottles, your clothes. These things they have matter, they have a non-void, but they get their utility from having a void. Like imagine, if my dress didn't have a neck hole, it would kind of not be as useful. Or if the void of your clothing is supposed to be the shape of your body. So it's useful as long as it has that void. I brought this instead of an extra slide. You can kind of see it's made of yarn, but it's in lace knitting, it gets its design from the voids. So it's really an arrangement of holes, of voids, rather than just an arrangement of yarn. I made this, no big deal. And then he moves to architecture, and this is one I think is really interesting. That the house, of course, where we all are inside the building is a void, and it wouldn't be very useful without that. But also voids like windows and doors. I think, and I'm going to talk about this a little bit more later, mostly what makes architecture attractive and pleasant is how many appealing voids there are for people to get into. So if you look at, a nice comfortable couch or an appealing little walkway, you kind of want to be there. You imagine yourself in there. And I think that's a lot of what makes architecture good. It's not, looking at the walls or the building, that's very pretty necessarily, but there's a lot of spaces to be. And I think that's true also with the trail. If you see a trail, you kind of want to go through it. There's a place inviting you to be there. Okay. Left this one blank. Because I'm standing in a void right now, and you're all helping me build this void. The reason you can see me is because there's not a bunch of other people talking. You're all participating in this custom we have of being silent, unless you're, asked a question. Being silent, there's not a huge video playing behind me. There's not a lot of motion going on around me. So the reason you can see me as a presence is that there's this absence all around me. And it's, I won't mention Derrida any other time in this talk, but that's kind of his thing, that presence and absence are in dialogue, and they create each other. So anytime we want to see a something, there's usually a nothing around it. In things like sports or competitions, it's definitely a something. What they've done is kind of removed a lot of possible information. They've removed things like, they've made things really uniform and the same every time. You wouldn't necessarily want to watch a game if every time they play a game, the conditions are different. We're sort of trying to, the football field's always the same size, the bases are always the same distance from each other, depending on what kind of league you're in. So that what can be showcased is what's relevant, the skill of the athletes or the skill of the chess players, whatever it is. Everything's always the same because we want to focus and make present this particular thing. So there's always a void around whatever's relevant. You might say that the word relevant's doing a lot of work there. It's going to continue to do a lot of work, and it might want to see its union representative by the end of this talk. Just a nice void. This is Lake Tahoe from the side. There's several voids here. We have another trail. We'll talk about trails as voids in a little bit. Beautiful void in the mountains that the water has filled in. And it's not really a void, there's water there, but I think we think of it as an abyss or a void or a cavity because there's no people in there except for divers. So we can't really go in there. To some extent, the mountains are voids too because they're void of people. They're just all rock. There's nothing but stuff. So there's no place to go. There's nothing in there. But if it was going to be, the interesting part of the underground, I think, of the mountains is the caves and voids and stuff. So underground rivers and things like that. There's a nice little landslide that's also a kind of void of vegetation because the earth has slid down recently. It hasn't had a chance to build back up its complexity. All right, another void-related question. How did the gold get into the mother lode of California? Huge, huge gold deposits all along the Sierras, and I'll talk about the gold rush a little bit later. Anybody know how it got in there? Probably has something to do with voids, yeah? The deep answer, deep time answer of how did it get there. Plate tectonics is the answer because plate tectonics, the Smartville blocks smashing against what was there of the United States, created all these voids in the rock. So Smartville smashing into Nevada was kind of the slow motion disaster. And so the rocks, why is it in the Sierras and not like right here, the gold I mean, why is the gold in one place and not another? These rocks smashing together, as I understand it, created a lot of voids, a lot of fractures, high angle faults and stuff. And then the water could get in, could get down to the magma layer where the gold is hanging out, where the gold is mostly hanging out down in the lower regions of the earth, and could kind of wash back up and fill in the cracks, kind of like mortaring the cracks in the rock. So both quartz and its friend gold and silver and some other stuff too end up in the void. So no voids, no gold, basically, at least in the Earth's crust. Now I'm going to talk about magic. Think of magic tricks. I think the most core magic trick, if you say something like, make like a magician and disappear, yes. The core magic trick is either making yourself disappear, making something disappear, making something appear out of nothing. And what you're doing is creating a sort of counterfeit void, a fake void. I love this. This is a patent for a magic hat, and you can see how many voids there are in this hat. When I think of a magic hat, I think maybe it just has one void for a rabbit to hang out, but this guy has a plurality of internal cavities. There's cavities to hold water, there's cavities to hold your wand, to hold your cards, your potentially scarves if you're gonna pull them out. Let's see. I won't say this is every magic trick, that every magic trick has this kind of void, but it seems that almost all the ones that I've been able to encounter have some kind of void. The mentalist illusions, when people are doing kind of mind reading and stuff like that, they're similar, except for often the void is a little more abstract. So we would never get abstract here. Here's the Turk, the famous automaton that plays chess. And this is a magic trick, one of my favorite magic tricks. And this is how it works. You can see there's a counterfeit or simulated void. There's a fake void there's nobody, it's just this robot who's doing it. There's nobody operating the controls. And then down here, there's a disguised void, similar to the magic hat. There's a secret place where a person actually is, a chess master actually is going to be hanging out and actually operating the chessboard. One of my favorite magic tricks related to voids is these scientists were studying magic, and they were like, okay, you can make something disappear. You can make like a coin disappear. But they managed to fool about 30% of people by making literally nothing disappear. So pretending there's a coin, making it disappear. I think that's a pretty special magic trick. It's called the phantom vanish, if you want to Google it. All right. Here are two pictures I took from hiking. What do these have in common? Nothing. They're both trails, thank you. Exactly. They're kind of different kinds of trails. They seem different to me at first. This trail has been worn into the surrounding vegetation by feet, maybe by park rangers, maybe by animals. Most of the a lot of the trails that we have, and even the roads, were originally ungulate trails or deer trails, animals walking from resource to resource. And then the one on the right is a rock cairn. Is that how you say it? Rock cairn. This is a really, really ill-advised hike. I don't recommend taking this hike. And here, it's more somebody's actively added information. So they've stacked the rocks, and you can see when you could really see the rock stacks sort of sticking out from the rest of the world. It's like, oh, you wouldn't mistake it for just rocks that naturally happen to be there. It looks really different from all these other rocks. So the one trail looks like you're kind of removing information, and this trail looks like you're adding information. But I'm going to argue that they're both removing information. In the sense of Shannon information, or related but not exactly the same concept, Kolmogorov complexity, maximum information is when something has had all of its patterns taken out of it. So purely random, purely stochastic streams of information are maximal information. And these rocks are, besides the rock here, these rocks are pretty random. You know, they fell through a lot of different processes, weather and lichens and stuff breaking down over time. So there's a lot of information there. By stacking them on top of each other, we're putting them in a pattern. So in order to, if we wanted to sort of mathematically specify this rock cairn, it would be a lot easier than trying to mathematically specify somehow the rocks in the background. So the trail is the same thing. There's all kinds of information, and it's life, so it's not random, but it's more random than this nice linear trail. We've kind of raised out the information along this line, and they're similar, I think. I want to emphasize that they're the same kind of trail in that we're following this sort of signature of intelligence. And I don't mean necessarily human intelligence, because this could be ungulate intelligence too, or any kind of animal. I think even little shrews maybe make little trails for themselves to hop along really fast to run away from their predators. But when we see either of these, we don't think, oh, that just happened naturally. That just happened randomly. When we see these, we know there's some kind of intelligence behind this. There's a trail to follow. So one of my favorite scholars, Jean-Louis Dessalles, argues that there are two kinds of information. Yes, there's this Shannon information that's maximally random with all the patterns edited out of it so we can transmit it as fast as possible. But a lot of time what we mean by information is this other sense. A lot of times what we mean by information is patterns, removing information in the sense of randomness, taking the randomness out. One of my favorite paper of his is on coincidences. I think we often think of a coincidence as something that's just low probability. Like, what are the odds is something you might say to a coincidence. Dessalles argues that it's actually a sudden, unexpected lack of complexity in the kind of complexity I've been talking about. It's if your car's odometer says 54389 or something, that's not much of a coincidence. But if it says 22222, that's kind of a coincidence. It's no less of a probability than the other number, but it takes fewer bits to specify it. You can just say a 2 and then repeat it, whereas the other one it's somewhat more complex to specify. The most common kind of coincidence, meeting someone that you know when you're on vacation or something like that. So you're someplace that you aren't usually, you have this prediction of how complex it's going to be. That, if I come to Santa Monica, I'm going to mostly see people I don't know. I'm predicting that the world is going to be complex from my perspective. And if I happen to meet like someone I know from home, that's a coincidence. Like, oh wow, that's weird. And it's a coincidence in Dessalles' framework because the world is somehow a lot more simple suddenly than I expected it to be. I already have a model for that person. I already knew them, so wow, this is great. This is real simple. I think a similar thing is going on with trails and stuff like that. And when you encounter a coincidence, it's kind of creepy and cool. It's like, what made that happen? Synchronicity or whatever. And I think that's because usually drops in complexity are the signature of intelligence, like the trail. You don't expect that to happen randomly. So when we see drops in complexity, we expect somebody's behind that, something's behind that, some kind of uniting principle. And I would say they're a complexity illusion, kind of like the magic tricks, making the world look somehow less complex than it really is. And they make for good stories. They're very interesting. So often low complexity is tied to a story. A story is reality with all of the extraneous stuff removed from it. So it's just the relevance, and again, relevance doing a lot of work here. And this is just Jean-Louis Dessal's model of what defines a coincidence, that the expected complexity, the number of bits you expect your brain to have to use to model the world is a lot more than you actually have to use. What you observe is a lot more simple than what you might have expected. And when you're on an off-trail section, like you're bushwhacking through the trees, and maybe the map isn't quite mapping onto the territory, and you finally see that trail. It's such a relief. It's so great when the observed complexity suddenly goes down, because it's work to deal with complexity. And I think this is true of not just coincidence, but news, something that's news, something unexpected, but typically these are things where they're easier to specify. Like he gives the example of lottery numbers. If the lottery number comes up 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, that's news. That's pretty interesting. Or if it's your particular anniversary or something like that. But if it's just an unfamiliar string of numbers, it's not as interesting. Okay. Now I'll talk about Hofstadter. So I think Dessal's second definition of intelligence, where you're removing information in the Kolmogorov or Shannon sense, goes with Hofstadter's definition that everything is about analogies, that analogy is the core of cognition, he says. He gives a definition: intelligence is the ability to see the essence of the situation at a glance. So the smarter you are as a species or as an individual, the better you have of just the better chance you have of looking at an unfamiliar situation and knowing what it's about. That can be either I'm real familiar with the situation, I've seen it a million times. That could be I've seen something like that, and it's relevantly similar to what's happening now. So I can map it onto what's happening now. So the process of becoming more intelligent is getting more and better analogies in your head. And he also calls these categories, that anytime you're using a word, you're using it as a category. And he says this is even true of words like but or nonetheless, that there are situations that fall into these categories that are clearer the more you're a native speaker of the language. So intelligence is stripping away complexity. Intelligence is kind of trying to get down to just the gist of the situation, the essence of the situation, the story, without the extraneous details. When people come up with new words, it's kind of annoying sometimes because they conflict with the words you already had, and you'll see when we have sort of neologisms, a lot of people just, it makes them really mad. Sometimes it makes me mad, because I don't necessarily need a new category for that, but sometimes I do, and sometimes I think there's almost a democratic process. It's not, nobody's voting, but just by using words, we kind of vote on what words become concepts, what words become categories. And if I just use a word, it's not a category. You have to agree with that by understanding it, by accepting that as a category. Okay. So new patterns, new categories. Patterns are voids of complexity. Patterns are a sudden drop in complexity. Oh, I've seen that before. I'm familiar with this. I understand the essence of this. And if you try learning a new domain, you'll find that there's a lot of jargon, that there's a lot of words you learn. If you're learning programming, if you're learning rock climbing, if you're learning knitting, there's a lot of new words to learn. And it can seem very complex. But actually, the world seen by an expert within their domain is much simpler because they have these categories. I've seen that before. I know what that is. So it's kind of necessary, and the jargon, even though it seems complicated, makes the world simpler. If I'm looking at a rock face, it's just real complicated. I don't know what it is. But if I have words for the different kinds of handholds and footholds I might use, then I have more of an idea of how to use it, how to get up it. It's a little bit less complex. Okay. Now I'm gonna show you a trap. Who's this a trap for? A cat, yes. So this is a void that a cat might want to get into. I think all traps have a void. I haven't exactly verified this or proven this, but most traps involve some kind of a void that you want your prey to imagine itself into. If I wanted to trap a cat, I might leave this around. Does anybody know why cats like boxes? I've heard different theories. Yeah, they feel secure. There's a little bit of a wall around them. I've heard, because they're ambush predators, so I'm an ambush predator, so I understand this. So they like a place where they can observe things without being observed, kind of being protected. So it's something you might think about. And people, I think, have different kinds of voids that they would like. I would be surprised to see an adult person get into this trap, but maybe a small person might be very interested in getting into this trap. Here's a trap for people. Here's a people trap. Might be there's a void in here. It's sort of an elaborated void that gives you hints to what's in it, but it's still kind of mysterious. So you have cues that it's probably safe. I don't know. Here's another kind of trap we can imagine ourselves into. Oh, it looks so nice. And this kind of goes to architecture being how many attractive voids are there, inviting voids. Does it invite you into it versus is it kind of spiky and weird and uncomfortable and plain? I don't know. This is pretty inviting to me. I might like it if it's even more cave-like. It would be even more inviting to me. Okay, here's a different kind of trap. I think this is not a very effective trap for people. And part of the reason is there's these voids, okay, chairs and tables lined up along a hallway, but there's also people walking along the hallway. So it just doesn't seem like it's very comfortable. It seems like it makes me kind of feel like can't relax. It's not separated off. And here's a better one. This is a similar situation, but it's separated from the coming and going. If I go sit up here on this cafe platform, I'm raised off the ground a little bit. I can still watch people going by like a cat, but I'm a little bit protected from them. It makes me feel more, it's a nice place to be. It also has a little roof, so I'm protected from weather. It has a pool of light, so I can see what's going on. Here's another trap. So getting a little less object level, a little more abstract. The voids I want to talk about now are mostly in our heads. You have all fallen into this trap, as I have as well. And I think this is the main way that you can be a social influencer. Is more creating new voids rather than trying to fill some existing void. Here's a crackpot theory I have. Is anybody on Twitter? Yeah. Do you ever get mad at tweets or at tweeters? I do, yeah. So that's like half the point of Twitter is to get mad. I don't know. It's like, does anybody else but me listen to music with rude and violent lyrics? Yes. Do you ever get mad at the singer or the rapper? Why not? What is that you do sometimes? Why is he saying this to me? Sometimes they're saying very rude and horrible things to their interlocutor, but it doesn't make me mad, at least. I feel like, yeah, that's... And I think my crackpot theory is that it's because we automatically put ourselves in the place of the speaker, or at least like next to the speaker, like, fuck him up, Socrates. We're gonna be on the side of the speaker. We understand that he's not talking to us. He's not saying these horrible things to us. Whereas with Twitter, I think it's much easier to think this person's attacking me, because that would just be silly for music. And I haven't worked out a whole book-length treatise on how to do this, but I think this is important for writing and for when you're creating language of what kind of void am I creating? Am I inviting the person to be on my side, or am I inviting the person to be against me in some way? Okay. I don't know. Some people have told me that doesn't make any sense, but hopefully. So what would happen, here's a gold miner. What would happen if gold were discovered underneath a philosophy building today? Would there be a gold rush? Probably not. But there was a gold rush when it was discovered in the Sierras in the 1840s, 1850s. Why is that? Yeah? Yeah. Property rights, absolutely. The gold rushes do still take place today in the 21st century, but they take place in places like the Amazon or the Sahara Desert, stuff like that. They wouldn't take place here because there's no void. And I think every frontier is a void. Of course, it's not actually a void, but it's an imaginary void. We sort of, every human group that wants to do range expansion, which has been happening since humans existed, they have to imagine themselves into an imaginary void that, oh, those other people, their property rights don't matter, or whatever. So here, the idea of this void spreads. People accept this idea of the void. We're going to go on this gold rush. We're going to mine gold, or we're going to round up maverick cattle, or whatever it is. And it's I think it's a strong meme that spread like wildfire in the 1840s and 1850s and around the world at various times, mostly in the Sierras. But this also is the case. An imaginary void, I think, is more important than a real void, even in the object level case. Like if I want to walk to the side, I have to imagine a void next to me. Like maybe I sense it. Maybe if I'm blind, I reach out or have some sort of cane or something. But even just to move my hands around, I have to sense that there's a void for me to move into. So I think that we can think of that as an analogy for the social case. This is one of my old Ribbon Farm slides, but just to remind you of my view of reality. My view of reality is that we're always doing simulations of the future. We're always projecting ourselves into the future. And we're using information from our own pasts that we've acquired. Some of these may be voids. Some of these, I have this particular role, or wait. We have some kind of identity or role that, me, but different. I've listed some potential voids here. I love the idea of the sheriff. I love frontier stuff, but either there's no sheriff in town and I'm going to fill this void, I'm going to be the law, or maybe there is a sheriff in town, I have to get rid of that sheriff and create a void. Maybe he's a bad sheriff, I don't know. Things like being a primatologist. I don't think that was much of a thing. I think Jane Goodall made that sort of a famous idea, and now we have more of a concept of, okay, I'm somebody who studies primates. Things like contests create an imaginary void. If I have a lottery or SpaceX or something like that, not SpaceX, X Prize, I'm sorry. any kind of contest, we know there's going to be a winner. I think that's true of sports as well, sports and games and things. There's definitely going to be this winner, and I'm trying to imagine myself as the winner. Conferences, you imagine yourself attending the conference. I've been imagining myself speaking up here, being a monk, being someone's spouse or lover. I think celebrities often, I don't know if this is still the case, but throughout the past 50 years or so, they often aren't allowed to publicly date anybody for reasons of their careers, because if they're dating somebody, their fans can't imagine themselves as the partner or lover of the celebrity. So if I'm famous and everybody wants to imagine they're my boyfriend or something, it ruins that fantasy if I actually have a boyfriend or a husband. My being an astronaut, an example, I think everybody wanted to be an astronaut during the 60s and 70s, maybe still today. The Barkley marathons, I might have spelled that wrong. I think that's missing an E. Anyway, don't assume that's the right spelling. But Barkley marathons are the hardest ultra marathon in the world, basically, where this guy just kind of thought it would be funny and interesting to have this competition where you run for something like 60 hours straight through horrible terrain. There's no technology allowed, really. They run around. It's multiple marathons worth of running. I don't know what the total distance is, but it's I think, what is it? It's 100 miles, but it's tons of altitude. And because this is a terrible idea, but a lot of people enjoy doing this. They try it because it's kind of the edge of human capability. It's like the edge of what's possible. And he makes it a little harder every year, as every time somebody wins it. There hasn't been, and nobody's finished it in a few years, but he makes it a little harder every time yeah, there's no end. He makes it an infinite game. Yeah, I think there's no final Barkley marathons, but he's created this void, and as awful as it is, people walk into his trap and will try to run the marathons. So I will admit I fantasize about running it, but I don't think that's gonna happen. Internet, I think it's pretty obvious that the internet is full of voids that we can start imagining ourselves into. So to kind of summarize and conclude, one option is just to fill existing voids, just to say, oh, here's a role or identity that could be me. And the other option is to somehow create these new voids that people might want to fill. And I think that's what changes the fabric of our social structure, of creating new identities, new contests, new games or sports or roles, anything like that. What do these have in common? The successful ones, I think, are an imaginary zone of low complexity, where the relevant, again, the interesting, the attractive aspects are showcased. People sometimes fantasize about, oh, it would be so nice just to go back to the land and be a farmer. It would be so simple. And of course, it's not really simple, but it's just as complicated as anything else. But creating an attractive void, you're kind of creating something where people can project a simple kind of imagination onto it. It's a respite. It's so calming and easy compared to the complexity of the present. And I think that's true, not just farming, but a lot of things. We imagine the next goal we get through, life will be so much simpler. I won't have this problem. It will not get any simpler no matter what. And what you're doing, to be all poetic, is you're creating cracks that the gold can come in and mortar with the water. So not just I'm going to be here, I'm going to be this presence, but here's an absence that maybe can be filled by natural and by human processes. And I'm not saying that's good. It's incredibly dangerous. And I will take any questions if anyone has them. Thank you. Why is it dangerous? I think all social change has a potential to be dangerous. So I create a void, and it's some, the axe murderer competition or something like that, some intellectual equivalent of that. It could be people, want to do that. If I think urban explorers I think it's cool, going into kind of abandoned buildings. It's also incredibly dangerous, but people get attention for it. It's also just interesting, so people tend to do that stuff. I think any kind of void you're creating has if it's the more powerful it is, the more dangerous it is. I think that might be all of my time. Yes. Um, Connecting sensory voids or object level voids to the Buddhist metaphysical void. I don't know anything about that, so I was just kind of using Lao Tzu as on the object level. I'm brainwashed by the tantric Buddhists, so I don't even see like having unself as being necessarily a good thing. They all seem to be like the more self and the more suffering you do and the more desire you have, the better. So I don't know. I'm not an expert. That's a great question. So to summarize, if you can't hear, he was saying the world is kind of mapped. Like there aren't really geographical voids anymore. So have the number of voids gone up or down? So I have a question. Which is bigger, the surface of the Earth or the internet? So I think the voids now are social voids, are imaginary, they're more in the land of imagination, but I think the land of imagination is bigger than the surface of the Earth. I think there's more there. Potentially it goes out all the way into space, potentially. What is that? Sea, star, and spirit. I like that. So spirit representing more what I was talking about, the kind of social and imaginary voids. Things like going into some kind of virtual reality, which I think the internet basically is. Those spaces, they aren't real spaces in the sense that you can't walk on them, but I think they're real in terms of what humans care about. What's new, what's interesting, what can we interact with. I think the geographic voids are actually kind of boring. Like I like them. I live in one in a desert, but they're not as interesting as ones that are filled with people and their weird ideas. So I would say I think the number of voids has gone up because we've increased the amount of conceptual space that we have to play with. I think sometimes. I think, for instance, with architecture especially, I had some architecture slides I deleted because it just was off topic, but something like a garden space or a courtyard, people don't tend to like just sitting in the middle of nothing or in, just sort of along, I don't know, sort of a blank wall or something. What people find comfortable, kind of like the cat box, what people find comfortable is maybe a low wall at their back so they can, and partially enclosed. So because of the type of beings we are, we like to have some ability to feel protected and also to see out, to see people walking down the street or something. So as far as architecture, yeah, I think voids are created by enclosure. I'm not sure all of them are, but I think the idea that we want that simpler voids in the figurative sense will be more successful is the idea that they are kind of enclosing. Here's this relatively simple idea rather than just do anything with this. I also think obstructions are necessary for creativity. So you can't really be creative if you can just do anything. But if you have to write a poem that's 10 words long that includes a llama, then that's that's an obstruction that might be more of a jolt to creativity than just write something. So I think enclosure shows up in this in a lot of senses.
I really enjoyed the kind of rapper versus Twitter.
Thank you. Yeah.
But Twitter almost is this space where you can eat.
Interesting.
If you view void as being competitive spaces, there's value to be captured, and we're all kind of chasing
So it's all kind of like the cattle on the west where we're sort of fighting over to that's interesting. Yeah, I need to think about that more. I like that idea though. There's something this connects to, but I'm going to be standing here for 5 minutes trying to think of what it is. Sorry. That's interesting. Yeah. Yeah, I had a different slide that was connecting this to the essence of peopling and to a couple other things, but I thought maybe that was just too far. Go ahead. Mhm. I think there's two ways that can go. So one is you create a new void, now there's a new arena of competition, so there's less pressure on the existing ones, so there's kind of more pools, more things. The sort of Girardian sense of people are just copying each other kind of ignores human creativity. René Girard, who he says we have this mimetic urge to just copy each other. I'm strawmanning a little bit, but I would never. So it's like it's a new thing for people to copy. So yeah, there's competition there, but I think it's creating different kinds of competition can be more interesting than just everybody's trying to get on the baseball team. Like, well, what if there's a fencing team too? Mm-hmm. There's also competition to create new voids and to sort of subvert existing competitions, existing art forms, and there's some danger of disappearing up our own nether orifices, but still, it's kind of interesting. I'm sorry, I can't hear you. So where does the drive to create new voids come from? I don't really know. I think maybe just feeling that the existing voids are not adequate. So when you create a new category or a new word or something, it's often that you just have this novel situation you've never seen before. And maybe it's that there are new desires that are no longer fulfilled, or new situations, that new technology, whatever, that imply voids around them, and then void entrepreneurs can kind of make us. So maybe the spirit of entrepreneurship is ultimately. Yeah, so it's going to be successful if it's a better compression. Basically, I think is my summary of what you said, that you can capture more information with a tighter, easier summary that's going to put less stress on the little gray cells. Yes. I like that word. I'm going to put that word to work. Elegance. Elegance and relevance. Yeah. That's a good question. What's the difference between a void and a template? I think a template is a type of void, and kind of like I think a piece of paper is a template. A piece of paper is a void. So I think we use the word template when there's something quite concrete that we're going to fill in a pretty understood way, rather than, I think templates don't tend to be imaginary voids that we're going to project ourselves into, but I think they're similar. There's a lot of synonyms for, yeah, it's kind of like I wanted to mention the Wittgensteinian, you're spinning, what concepts and categories are not necessarily one essence, but they're kind of spinning things together. Like we start out with this category and then we kind of spin on this category like it was a little bit of fiber and a piece of yarn. So I think they're related. There's a zone of relatedness. Good question. Can a void exist without a goal? What do you mean by goal? Or end? I think, now that I think they can. I think voids can exist without a goal. I think often we don't know what we'll end up with. So often the history of various voids, DARPANet and stuff like that, nobody knows what's gonna be the final end of it. It might start out with particular ends, but they're not necessarily gonna be the final ends of it. So absolutely. I like that. I don't know exactly how that would work, but if you came up with an analogy, I would be interested to hear it. I was wondering if voids kind of suck things into them, maybe suck us into them like a trap. He was asking, can you push a void onto something? I don't have a good map for that in my head, but if anybody has an example, I'll hear it. Go ahead. Oh, that's fine. No, question's fine. I know that feel. So is yeah. So she's asking, do creating voids, like the trail or the cairns or whatever, they're kind of reducing complexity. But does creating these actually increase overall complexity? Absolutely. And use the word emergence. That's another one that Jean-Louis Dessalles likes to use. That he thinks what emergence is when a system that has a lot of complexity manages to organize itself such that it's describable in a much simpler way. So, so kind of an unexpected reduction in complexity is one of his definitions of emergence. I think just thinking of the object level voids like trails, they decrease the complexity of the landscape, but they increase the use by humans at least. So there's more peopling around in the wilderness and stuff, and I think that's true of social voids too, like roles and identities. They decrease the complexity from the perspective of the person following that path, but more paths means it's more followable for more people. So there's more people mixing together, creating messes in our heads and otherwise, and I think it does get more complex overall. Am I supposed to like stop talking or stop? I'll just take questions until somebody drags me off with a vaudeville cane. No? Okay. Okay.